This shows where the country is going to. And that's the way I feel about it.
Thank you very much. How did the news of the president's death affect you, ma'am?
It's almost unbelievable. I'm so shaken. He was so vital. And he didn't alone have the problems of just this country. He accepted the problems of the world and was trying to straighten everything out. Parties mean nothing at a time like this. It's a terrible thing. His young family, wonderful family. It's unbelievable. It's almost like it was a relative of my own.
Thank you very much. How did it affect you, the news?
I think this is a terrible disgrace for our nation, and I think the cause of it was integration. And what do the people think they're going to accomplish by assassinating the president? They killed Lincoln, but they didn't stop integration, and they won't now either. I'm just sorry for Mrs. Kennedy and his children, who lost a husband and a father. This is a disgrace, a black day for our country.
I feel exactly the same way.
I'm a Mexican, and I love Mr. Kennedy very much. We love her in Mexico. He was the most wonderful president this country ever had.
Thank you, sir.
Biggest tragedy we've ever had. He was marvelous, a good man, wonderful. It's sad.
I think this country has suffered a terrible loss, and I personally feel it very strongly myself. I feel very sorry for his wife and his family, too.
The void that this country has suffered will take many years to forget.
Thank you very much.
I think it's a great calamity that shouldn't be happening in America at all. We were thinking that it could happen in Africa or in Asia, but not in America. This is very bad for America.
Well, since the death of Lincoln, I think this is really one of the greatest calamities that has happened to the United States.
Thank you very much, sir.
Is the president really dead?
Yes, ma'am, the president is dead.
God help us. What kind of a country are we living in? I'm telling you, there are people who are crazy. All that we have, and what do we want? Mother of God. Well, I'm going to say a prayer.
I guess I'm just as deeply shocked as everyone around here. The news strikes me as shocking as the day they bombed Pearl Harbor. Just walking around in a daze. Really, really unbelievable. Reflects the day and age that we're living in. There's violence and crime and everything else.
How did the news affect you, ma'am?
I don't speak.
Thank you very much. No, the governor's still alive. How did the news affect you, ma'am?
I already spoke my piece.
All right, thank you.
I just think it's just a disgrace. I happen to come in from California, and this is the first place I happen to visit, and they have news like this. I just think I just don't think it will ever be lived down, really, I don't.
That was Bob McGonagle on the scene in front of St. Patrick's.
Everyone seemed to call everyone and ask them if they heard the news. We have two boys who go to school in the French school. Every time the phone was free, someone would call and ask them if they had heard the news. It's one of the most shocking things that I've ever experienced in Paris. I was here when President Roosevelt was assassinated. Excuse me, I'm upset myself. When President Roosevelt died, and everyone had the same kind of numbness and shock. And people asked me as an American, who is Mr. Truman? Who is your president? What is he going to do? We don't know anything about him. And people are asking the same question now. When the news came to Paris, it came along with the first announcement that Lyndon Johnson had a heart attack. And again, there was that numbness. And then there was the denial that Johnson had suffered this heart attack.
This is George Hamilton Combs at the United Nations. The delegates' lounge, which is usually a crowded, bustling place with 3 or 4 deep lined up at the bar, is almost deserted today except for scattered knots of delegates who are standing discussing the death of President Kennedy with a grave and sorrowful mien. A moment ago, one of the leaders of the African bloc, Ambassador Nathan Barnes of Liberia, told me that he regarded this as one of the great tragedies of human history, saying that President Kennedy had worked tirelessly for the emancipation of the Negro at home and for the end of colonialism abroad, and that he hoped that his successor would carry on this work. There were similar expressions of opinion, which I shall bring you later, from other African as well as European and Asian nations. But the mood still is primarily one of incredulity, of disbelief, and of deep shock. Wherever there are expressions of overt emotion, they are angry and outraged, with one delegate calling this one of the most dastardly acts of history. A pall has descended over the United Nations. When that pall will be lifted, no man today can foresee. This is George Hamilton Combs, returning you now to our studios.
We switch now to Washington.
The tragic death of President Kennedy. I extend my deepest and most sincere sympathy to you and your children. May God comfort you and sustain you in your great loss. Unquote. The governor ordered the state and national flags lowered to half-mast at the state capitol. An aide said Governor-elect Paul Johnson would have a statement later on the president's death. Bill Slaton, Jackson, Mississippi.
The White House is a place of great sorrow. The office of Pierre Salinger is trying to cope with its most difficult problem, but they too are groping, trying to assimilate the fact that the president is dead. There's been confusion concerning arrivals and departures. At one point, Charles Horsky, the president's advisor on national affairs, was manning the news desk. I asked him whether there was any such thing as a schedule. He said, no, absolutely nothing at the moment. This in the face of reports from outside that the president's body was aboard a plane and was due in Washington later today. Some sources say approximately 5:40. The White House says only sometime today. It's a quiet White House, a White House of a frequent, unashamed tear. Ken French, Mutual News, the White House.
This is Serge Flieger standing on the Boulevard des Capucines in Paris, and I can only report a scene of utter desolation as Frenchmen here and Europeans generally hear the terrible, shocking news of the death of American President John Kennedy. I stand here and I see people who have turned on their car radio and other people who have a transistor set. They're listening to the last news. They're hearing the reports, the flashes from Washington and from the United States. They're ashen-faced. They're white. They're really white in the face, and they're turning to each other and they say, what is going to happen? Kennedy is no more. This man who led the Western world towards achievement, towards resistance to the communist menace, is dead. They are profoundly upset, these Frenchmen who, here on the boulevards of Paris, are about to go home, who've left the movies, who've left the music halls, and who've stopped to hear the news, the distressing news of the assassination.
Now to...
It's official now. Lyndon B. Johnson has been sworn in as the President of the United States. The oath administered by United States District Judge Sarah T. Hughes. Mr. Johnson took the oath, President of the United States, aboard the presidential plane at Love Field in Dallas, Texas, just a short while ago. Mr. Johnson, now the President of the United States, is preparing to fly to Washington to take over the reins of government. We've got more reaction now coming in from the United States Department of State. On the scene, Mutual's Bill Evanson.
The State Department, like everywhere else, is in a state of shock. The news that President Kennedy is dead has filled everyone with a deep, stunned sorrow. Most offices are for practical purposes closed as employees mill about and discuss the tragic event. But the high echelon offices of the department are in close touch with the White House and with Texas. As the word was passed that the body of President Kennedy will be returned to Washington this afternoon, the events of the afternoon became a reality. And now there are few dry eyes. Even the newsroom that generally rings with sounds of busy reporters is somewhat quiet. This sad day is apparent in the red eyes of everyone here. This is William Evanson at the State Department.
Massachusetts. Go ahead, Ed Semprini.
Residents of the seaside vacation retreat of Hyannis Port, where the famed Kennedy compound stretches along the shores of Nantucket Sound, express shock and disbelief today at the news of the assassination of President Kennedy. The compound where the president maintained his summer home has been sealed off. State police and local police have barred reporters and sightseers from the compound area. It was learned that the president's mother, Mrs. Rose Kennedy, had been playing golf at the Hyannis Port course at approximately the time her son was shot. She was informed of the tragedy by her chauffeur. American League baseball player Jimmy Pearsall, who recently purchased a home around the corner from the Kennedy compound, said he was on the golf course when informed that the president was assassinated. It's a terrible tragedy. I still cannot believe it, said Pearsall, a friend of the president. A longtime friend of the Kennedy family, Assistant Postmaster William O'Neill of Hyannis Port, said he was shocked beyond words. Residents of the small Hyannis Port community strolled the tree-shaded streets in shocked silence. An elderly woman entered the post office 1 block away from the Kennedy summer home, weeping unashamedly. It's such a terrible, terrible thing, she cried. The president's father, former Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, was reported taking his usual afternoon nap at the time of the assassination of his son in Dallas. At this moment, it could not be determined how the tragic news was relayed to the former ambassador, who is slowly recovering from a stroke. Hyannis Port is a village in mourning this afternoon.
And the other president, I did not mention him before, who will be in Washington, is Harry Truman, but Mr. Truman is not expected until tomorrow. And as had been announced late last night, the other former living president, Herbert Hoover, is 89 years old and is in ailing health in New York. He has expressed his regrets that he will not be able to be in Washington during this period of mourning.
Robert, Senator Humphrey spoke just a little bit ago about the courage and the extreme fortitude with which Mrs. Kennedy has handled this thing. The whole